On the outside, they were in prison. On the inside, they were free. That transformation of getting to know Jesus, and while he was in prison, just cleaned him. They will then go into the deep, dark places in the Oregon prison system that nobody else can go to. Going to change the culture of the prison from the inside out. God wants to use us in ways that he can be glorified.
Thank you for joining Mercy Today. How do mercy and compassion break down barriers and change everything? How do they bring hope? Be inspired as our guests share about the life-changing, soul-impacting work through the ministry of Mercy, Inc. and its partners. Here's your host, Dr. Dan Critches.
Well, I'm really glad to welcome you to this episode of Mercy Today Radio, where every time we get to tell the story of how compassion changes everything, and we're learning about how God plants that spirit of compassion in a whole lot of variety of different people and raises them up for lots of different things. And today is another one of those. We get to tell the story about the great work of Mercy, Inc. and its partners and friends here locally and around the world. So I always ask the question at the beginning, so where in the world are we going today? So sometimes we'll go to South Asia, sometimes we'll go to Latin America, the Caribbean, sometimes we'll go to Africa. But today we're right here in our own backyard. Listeners may not know this, but we record this show in the capital city of the state of Oregon. It's Salem, Oregon, and partly because several of the Mercy, Inc. leaders live right here, including Doug Hoffman, the executive director, who is at the studio here with us today. So the reality is today that every state in the U.S. and every country has prisons and a prison system. Some are hopeless and horrible, I'm sure, and some are maybe not so bad, but all of them house inmates, many of whom all of whom have lost their freedom, but many of whom have lost their future and even their hope for purpose and meaning. So what if there was a way to reach into those prisons and give hope and to bring some other way of purposeful living and a new life? So that's what our show is about today. I'm happy to welcome our guest into the show, and this episode, the title is The Awesome Power of a Changed Heart. So, listener, I want to welcome you to the discussion, invite you to lean in, open your heart, and actually listen to the end because we have a lot. Even after we close the radio, the timed portion, then we will continue with AfterWords. So you want to stay if you're on podcast. Stay for the rest of it. So I'm introducing in studio today is Tom Kohl, who is the founder and director of Paid in Full Oregon. We're going to learn about that. And that organization, Paid in Full, is a friend of Mercy. And again, today's episode is called The Awesome Power of a Changed Heart. So Tom, it is good to meet you in person. We've been on the phone a couple of times. I've heard you on the radio in the Portland area. We've talked about that. I want to thank you for taking the time to be here, and welcome to Mercy Today Radio.
Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here, and I like what you talked about earlier about compassion, because compassion is so important. When we see Jesus in the Gospels, he has compassion, but he takes action as a result of that too.
That's
and compassion
the key.
Without action is dead, but compassion with action makes a big difference.
I like it. Yeah. I like it. It's kind of like the old, I can... what's the word? Without love, I'm nothing. It's the clanging cymbals and stuff. If I do all that, do great stuff, but don't have love, compassion, I'm nothing. It doesn't matter. I think Rick Warren says life minus love equals zero. So a good way to put it. So, Tom, let's get started. It often happens in my experience, and I know in yours too, that God focuses our life through an event that we experience. And sometimes I start my God stories with, I was minding my own business one day. But yours isn't so much just kind of an idea that you might want to start something. It's a tragic story. Can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, it is. My life took a total different trajectory on July 21st of 2006 when I heard a knock on my door. That was the presiding judge in Washington County at that point, but heard a knock on my door at 11 p.m. I was upstairs in bed, and I put some sweats on and came downstairs and saw through the door a man I knew who was the senior district attorney for Washington County with two strangers, and I was a little concerned about that, and I opened up my door and invited them in, and after greeting each other, one of the men said, "Judge, please sit down," And he said, I have some news to tell you. Your daughter Megan was murdered earlier today. And so, I broke out sobbing. A parent's worst nightmare began for me and my wife at that point. And it was awful. It was just awful. Yeah.
Totally out of the blue.
Yeah.
And that changed use the word trajectory. Everything changed then.
Absolutely.
So, let me ask you this. How did that, because you had to process through all of that. I mean, the grief and the loss and all of that, and I've been through it myself. How did that change your relationship with God? I know you got up and went to work and put on the robe and, talked to people and made decisions and everything, but how did that news and that whole process working through, how did that change your relationship with God?
Well, I never realized at that point how much I needed God until that tragedy, entered my life. And it just, in a situation like that, you can turn to God or you can turn away from God. And so I was so fortunate that I was able to turn to God and got into the Psalms. It just happened to be that I was on a 2-week vacation starting that day. That was my last day.
Wow.
And so my church family gathered around me. My pastor gathered around me. I don't know what I would have done with all that with all that help. But during that time, I had so much sorrow and despair and hopelessness.
Normal human stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I turned to the Psalms, and the Psalms gave me so much comfort during that time. Yeah.
We talked about Psalms a little bit before we got on the air here, so maybe we can talk about off some other time, but thank you for that. And so did you, just let me ask you this, what did you get from God in the Psalms?
Well, I got comfort, and I realized at a later point that the comfort I got from God during that terrible time that I was going through, I was able to give to other people that same comfort that God gave me. And does that sound familiar?
It sounds familiar,
That's 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 4, the comfort we get from God when we go through those trials. The reason we do that is that He allows us that to happen so we can comfort other people.
Right.
And I've had a chance to comfort parents who have lost loved children through murders, car accidents, and things like that.
Yeah. Isn't it true that you are a better comforter because of your loss? Otherwise, it's words. I mean, you mean well. You can be, heartfelt. I went through that myself. I've never been as good a comforter for others as I have been since my tragedies. And so that's what God uses. I mean, He doesn't waste anything, even the things that are horrible and we never asked for. We prayed would never happen, but He's there with us and for us. So something happened. So that was 2006. And years have gone by, and here you are with an organization called Paid in Full Oregon. So how did your tragic loss lead to, what all was that process of now you're doing some extraordinary work? And I'm giving this particular show the title, The Power of a Changed Heart. You have a vision and a practical reality of going inside the prison and changing hearts in there. So how did that develop into a ministry?
Yeah, well, so I ended up, I was able to forgive the man who murdered my daughter. They caught him about a year later and charged him with aggravated murder. I was only able to forgive him through the power and presence of Jesus Christ in my life. I was so fortunate I didn't go through a lot of anger or bitterness. Jesus, that was a gift He gave me, that power of forgiveness.
Life-saving.
Yeah, and that made a big difference in my life. So I ended up, there was a trial. He was found guilty at that trial in a neighboring county. And then I felt God was asking me to write a book about that. So I began writing the book, and I finished it after about 6 months. I thought I was done with it, but God wanted me to write one more chapter. He wanted me to go visit Robert in prison. Now, Robert had been found guilty of aggravated murder, and he'd been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So that was a very difficult time for me to just think about going and visiting him in prison. And there were all sorts of hurdles that had to be overcome for a sitting judge to go visit a man who murdered his daughter in prison. He was in Umatilla at the Two Rivers Correctional Institution. So,
And so that prompted, when did you get the idea of what you're doing now?
So I went and visited him in prison, and I was able to write the last chapter of my book. I thought I was writing the book for parents who had lost loved ones through tragic circumstances, or anybody who had lost a loved one. And God actually, that was one of the purposes He had, but another purpose was that I later found out about. he showed to me was that opened the door for me to go speak in prisons in the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
And so I traveled around prisons speaking in Oregon about Jesus Christ and forgiveness. And to have a sitting judge come in and talk about hope and forgiveness and comfort was a powerful story to the inmates in the prison system.
More about that and a life-changing visit to Angola. We're going to hear about that right after the break. Don't go away, folks.
I'm Brad Swinford with Salem Concrete Paving. It's a privilege to partner with Mercy, Inc., who provides hope to people around the world by meeting critical needs and introducing people to Jesus. I know that through Mercy, Inc., I'm investing in God's kingdom as they spread the love and gospel of Christ around the world. So please join me in supporting Mercy, Inc. and Mercy Today Radio by praying or going to their website at MercyToday.global. Thank you.
This is Doug Hoffman, Executive Director for Mercy, Inc. Today I want to take you back to Africa. I want to talk about Bridge to Reading in particular. Bridge to Reading is a program where we teach adults how to read and write in their own language. And as we do that, we see a difference in their lives because all of a sudden there's more dignity in the home. There is more respect for the wives, for example, because they can't read. They're not considered worthy at that point in time. As they begin to read and write, then they can do their budgets. They can provide an income. Also, they can read the Bible. And if you think about it, as they start to become spiritually aware and they're actually able to take the Bible and make a difference in their lives, not only for their kids, but for their husband and for themselves for eternity. It is a powerful, powerful tool as we bring Bridge to Reading, teaching people how to read and write in their own language across the world.
Now's the time to become a part of something greater in our community. You and your organization can partner with Mercy Today and change the lives of thousands around the world. Our team of business professionals can also come alongside you and help you grow your organization to maximize your impact. Our goal is to help you increase your quadruple bottom line: people, planet, profit, and purpose. Consider being a sponsor of Mercy Today. Visit our website at MercyToday.global.
We are talking to Tom Kohl, the founder and director of Paid in Full Oregon. We're just getting started. We've got a whole lot more, and the title is The Awesome Power of a Changed Heart. We're dipping into that a little bit with Tom's heart being able to be changed and transformed so that he can be a tool in God's hands to liberate and to challenge and to do some wonderful things. We're getting right back into it. So, Tom, right before the break, you were talking about you were traveling to other prisons in Oregon, and then somewhere you leaped the boundaries. And tell us about that.
Yeah, so I started traveling in other states and speaking in prisons in other states about Jesus Christ and forgiveness. And so I ended up going to a prison in Louisiana called Angola. And Angola used to be one of the bloodiest, most violent maximum security prisons in the country. In 1 year, 20 men were murdered.
Wow.
It changed in 1995 when the new warden there, Burl Cain, invited the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary to come in and implant a 4-year college degree program in Angola. They did, and that was in 1995. And then in 1999, they had their first graduating class.
Yeah.
All the guys got a 4-year college degree.
Wow.
Just like the same type of degree you get on the outside.
Yeah.
And that began to change the culture of the Angola prison system. And so it was just a huge change there. I heard about that. I went down and I became good friends with the warden there. I spoke with the men down there. He invited me back several times. And one time we were in his office. It was in the evening. I was coming back to Oregon the next morning, and I prayed for him. And he said, "Judge, I want to pray for you." And he said, "Sit down, bow your head, and close your eyes." And so when the warden of a maximum security prison tells you to sit down, bow your head, and close your eyes, I did.
Yes, sir.
And this is the prayer that he prayed. He said, "Dear Lord, don't let this man rest until they have a Bible college in the Oregon Department of Corrections. Amen."
Wow.
And I looked up and I said, "Warden, I thought we were friends. Why would you want me to have no rest until something like that happens? It will never happen in Oregon. Oregon is one of the most unchurched states in the country. This is an impossibility. It won't happen." And he looked at me and said, "Judge, who do we worship?" And I said, "Yeah, you're right. We worship the God of the impossible."
Wow. What year was that, Tom?
That was in 2014.
14.
Yeah. So that God was speaking to me through Burl and planted the seed in my heart to see what I could do back here, even though I knew it would never happen.
Right, chance, right? Yeah.
So I came back and I started meeting with Oregon officials, and there was interest there. I met with the director of the Department of Corrections, asked her if she'd be interested in sending one of her people to go to have a vision trip and go to Angola, see what it was like. She said yes. My jaw dropped, and it was so easy. I mean, God just sort of made that door opened that door so wide.
Yeah.
And then I contacted some legislators, took a couple of, so in the end, we had 12 people go to Angola in January 2015, and they were Oregon officials, 2 state senators, 2 state representatives, somebody from the Attorney General's office, the DOC, and some other organizations. So we all went down there and experienced Angola. And they thought they were going to prison, but they were really going to church. They didn't realize it. And so it was just an amazing trip. We ran into seminary students there, talked with them, talked with graduates of the seminary. And one of the common stories they heard was that when I was, this is what the students would say, when I was out in New Orleans or Baton Rouge committing crimes and doing drugs, I was really in prison, and it wasn't until I was sent to Angola and got into the seminary that I became free. And so on the outside, they were in prison.
Yeah.
On the inside, they were free, and that really impressed the Oregon officials, and they thought about that. So fast forward, in 2017, I finally got the okay from the Oregon Department of Corrections to have a faith-based university come into one of Oregon's prisons to set up a 4-year college degree program. And so when I got word about that, I started my nonprofit. I wanted to call it Tetelestai. Of course, the people I talked to, why are you saying Tetelestai? And I said, well, those were the last words that Jesus said in John's gospel on the cross. It means paid in full.
Yeah, right.
And so, well, why don't you call it paid in full rather than Tetelestai? And I said, oh, that's a good idea. So we called it Paid in Full Oregon. That was the beginning of Paid in Full.
So the whole premise is the power of a changed heart and on the basis of forgiveness.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So tell us about that. I've got 2 dimensions. I got the vertical and the horizontal. So how does Paid in Full Oregon impact, or will it? I know we've got some interruption now because of COVID and everything, but what is your dream that inmates would experience the power of forgiveness on a vertical level?
Yeah. So we are allowing 25 men to come in each year, each cohort to come in. So we had our first cohort come in 2019, and we've now had our second cohort come in, and they are being trained. Each of they take general courses. They get a degree in liberal arts with an emphasis in psychology, social services, and leadership. And so these men are being trained to be psychological helpers to people in prison, to be leaders in prison, to be servant leaders in prison, and so this is the hope that these men, each of the classes they take, they're being taught by Corbin University. So Paid in Full has a funding agreement with Corbin University. We agreed to reimburse Corbin for all of their expenses on implanting a 4-year college degree program in Oregon. So these men will take math, science, they'll take all the courses that everybody else does on the outside. They'll end up getting that 4-year college degree. And then after that, they'll be trained. They'll also be trained during that time to be mentors and counselors. And so when they graduate, then they will be sent out to other prisons in the state of Oregon to be mentors and counselors, to be mental health helpers, to be education tutors, to help with gang renunciation, to help on suicide watch, to deliver death notices, to set up Bible studies. So the Department of Corrections has agreed to allow these men to be transferred out. I call them missionaries. Now, the Department of Corrections doesn't call them missionaries, but that's what we will call them. And so they will then go into the deep, dark places in the Oregon prison system that nobody else can go to. Prison Fellowship can't go to. Calvary can't go to. These men will be there, and they'll be able to minister to their fellow inmates or adults
as
in custody. As inmates.
That's
so,
the key.
And the key with all of the people that are coming into our program is they need to have to be eligible to apply to the college. They need to have at least 8 years left on their sentence, so that when they come into the program, they'll get their degree in 4 years, and then they have to give back for 4 years. So our ideal candidate is a lifer. because that's where we get the best bang for our buck. On a lifer, we get a great return on investment there because the lifer is going to spend the rest of his earthly life ministering in prison to his fellow inmates there. Wow. So, and that's the whole idea. It's going to change the culture of the prison from the inside out. Yeah.
Yeah. And just for our non-Oregon listeners, Corbin is a highly regarded Christian university. It has gone under different names, but it's well regarded here in our region. And it's right here in the capital city, right? It's in Salem,
within 3 miles as the crow flies from the prison that we have our college classes in. Yeah.
So what have you observed about a prisoner or an inmate who wants to get into the program, maybe your first cohort, and have you witnessed or seen or heard about their experience of that vertical forgiveness, of seeking and being assured of God's forgiveness?
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah. No, so I've like I said, I've traveled around the country. I've spoken with inmates who have graduated from similar programs, and I always hear just really amazing stories of that transformation of the heart. I spoke with one fellow in Mississippi several months ago. And I said, tell me your story. What's your story? And he said, well, when I was a young man, I had a car and I had a girlfriend and I had a home and I had a job. And these were idols to me. I didn't know Jesus then, but those were his idols. Yeah. And he said, I also, at my job, I worked on a chicken farm in Mississippi. And I worked on the hog machine. Now, the hog machine was a machine that ground up the heads and the beaks and the feet of the chickens and some other things, and then they turned that into a sludge, and they fed pigs with it. Yeah. So that was his job. He was the hog machine operator. Well, one day he was operating the machine, and it broke. And the sludge just filled all over him from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Yeah. All he wanted to do was to get clean. He was filthy, and all he wanted to do was to get clean. Fast forward now, he's in prison and he's serving a life sentence in the Mississippi prison system. And he said, I was in chapel one day and I still had not known Jesus at all. But I felt drawn to that. And he said, I was sitting in chapel there and all of a sudden I felt filthy again. I felt like I was dirty from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet. Then I ended up going down to the altar and I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and I was clean in an instant, And so he said that transformation of getting to know Jesus while he was in prison, just cleaned him, so that image of that sludge all over him and then being cleaned. Yeah.
There are some other images and things that I think we want to talk about, and we're going to run out of time on the radio portion here, but I want our listeners to stay tuned, particularly if you're on the podcast already, because it's the section that we call the AfterWords. So I've got some more questions, and I know you have stories, and so we're going to wrap up our radio portion, but you can stay for some AfterWords, yes, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, what I want to do is, let's see, our topic has been the awesome power of a changed heart. And that hog machine with those chickens, that's a very good, I can picture that. I can almost smell it. But our guest has been Tom Kohl, the founder and director of Paid in Full Oregon. And Tom, give us some concluding words. If you could talk to the listening audience, if you're standing up in front and they're gathered and we're just talking, how would you like to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty big question, and I could go in different directions on that. But let me start out here because I think that a lot of us in our life we end up doing something. We're in a profession where we've got a job doing something, and we're doing that job generally because we're skilled in doing that job. But that kind of that attitude that I had back then was kind of not the best attitude in the world, because God wants to use us. God wants us to use us in ways that He can be glorified. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm doing a good job as a judge, well, who's being glorified by that? Maybe I'm just saying there. But if I'm doing a job that I'm not capable of doing, and that job is being well done, who gets the glory for something like that?
There you go.
And so that's what God showed me. Yeah, you're a judge, Kohl, but you're also something else. And he allowed me to create this nonprofit that was going to benefit inmates throughout the state of Oregon. And one of the things that I had to do as an executive director of that nonprofit was to fundraise. I had no idea about what fundraising was all about. I had no idea what it was to be an executive director of a nonprofit. And God gave me amazing stories about fundraising. God ended up raising from June of 2018 to December of 2019 over $1 million for Paid in Full Oregon. And we needed $700,000 of that to remodel the classroom space that the Oregon Department of Corrections gave us to house the college. So,
Tom Kohl, thank you very much. The awesome power of a changed heart. We're going to come back with the afterwords, but we're going to close the radio portion. Thanks so much for coming in today. God bless you.
okay, thank you for having me here.
How do you multiply your time, talent, and treasures? By investing in Mercy Today. Whether it's going on a mission outreach halfway around the world or sharing your insights and experiences with others in our local community, our team of business professionals can help you multiply what God has given you. We can help you grow your organization so that you and your fellow work associates can utilize your talents for even greater causes as you multiply your resources to do even more. Join us and become a sponsor of Mercy Today. Visit our website at MercyToday.global. Have you been looking for new ways to grow your organization and have a lasting, eternal impact? Mercy Today has an amazing team of business professionals that have managed small businesses to large corporations, and we want to share that know-how and experience with you. We're also committed our lives to sharing the gospel with compassion and serving the practical needs of communities around the world. Partner with us and become a sponsor of Mercy Today. Visit our website at MercyToday.global.
This is Doug Hoffman, Executive Director for Mercy, Inc. Just thanking you for listening to MercyToday.global.
So good talking to Tom Kohl. Awesome power of a changed heart. If you have questions about the topic or about the organization or about Judge Tom, get in touch with us at MercyToday.global. We'll give you a direct connection over to him, and you can follow up and carry on that conversation. If there's a way that you'd like to know more or participate with them, you can do that. So, listener, I want to thank you today for tuning in. Really happy to have you. This is Mercy Today Radio, where we are telling the story of how compassion changes everything. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Critchett, wrapping up this episode. And until next time, may God help you be a part of what He is doing in our world today. Join us on the show again. Find out where in the world we'll be going next. Find all of our shows and a whole lot more at MercyToday.global. The podcast, if you're listening online, the podcast will commence momentarily. So, friends, God bless you, and goodbye for now. Welcome to the AfterWords portion of our broadcast here, and actually a podcast. I'm with Tom Kohl, the founder and director of Paid in Full Oregon, and the name of this episode is called The Power of a Changed Heart. As we were off air a little bit, we started talking about, one of the questions I wanted to ask Tom about was, it's a power of a changed heart, but that really is involved with the whole issue of forgiveness. And Tom, we don't want to go through everything because we talked for quite a while about that, but I was asking a question about the forgiveness is both on the vertical level. So like God was able to give you that sense of forgiveness, that would have been a horizontal time. But sometimes if an inmate feels that sense of remorse and that sense of guilt and sense of wrong, and like the guy with the hog machine and all the chicken stuff, he felt clean. So just maybe help us understand how an inmate can come to that point of understanding and needing and recognizing that they need and can have that vertical forgiveness, that they can cry out to God for forgiveness and He can deliver that to them.
Well, let me just tell you another story that I have, and it involves forgiveness. As I was traveling around the country, I spoke with inmates in different states, and one of the inmates I spoke to was telling me his story. He's in Texas, and he was telling me when he was about 14 or 15 years old, his dad, who was a member of a gang, the Aryan Nation gang in Texas there, gave him a gun and a mask and said, "Follow me, son." And so his name was Terry. And so Terry put the mask on, took the gun, and followed his dad, and they robbed banks. And they did a good job of robbing banks. They didn't get caught. His dad, when they would be with people, would talk to his friends, his fellow gang members, and tell them how proud he was of Terry because he was such a good bank robber. And so they ended up eventually getting caught. And Terry went to prison at that point. He was old enough to go to prison. His dad went to prison. And he avoided they didn't go to the same prison in Texas. They have like 103 or 104 prisons. And so eventually, though, Terry got out. He got married, had some kids, and then he heard a knock on his door one night, and it was his dad. He had gotten out of prison, and his dad handed him a gun and a mask and said, "Follow me, son."
Oh my!
Inexplicably, Terry did that, and they got caught after the first robbery, and he ended up getting a lengthy sentence in the Texas Department of Corrections, and so did his dad. He was so angry at his dad. He had so much bitterness and anger towards his dad. Eventually, he ended up starting to go to chapel in prison, and one day he became a follower of Jesus. He gave his life to Jesus, and Jesus gave him actually he started to feel some forgiveness for his dad. Well, later on, he was in chapel one day, and he saw his dad. His dad had actually been transferred to that prison, and he did not want to see. He was so upset. He still had that anger and bitterness. Yeah. And he got down on his knees in chapel and prayed that God would give him the power to forgive his dad. They ended up looking at each other. His dad saw him and motioned Terry over to sit down next to him in chapel, and he did. And his dad said, "I am so sorry, Terry. Please, I'm so sorry, son. Please forgive me for what I've done to you." He said, "I want to get to know Jesus as my Lord and Savior.
Wow.
Will you walk up to the altar with me?" And Terry looked at him and gave him his Bible and said, "Follow me, Dad."
Wow. The big reverse.
And it always brings tears to my eyes when I hear that story, when I tell that story. Yeah. So what an amazing power of forgiveness and reconciliation with God. So Terry ended up writing a devotional, he and two of his fellow inmates. It's called Exiles, and it's on Amazon. You can get it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a daily devotional, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
maybe our listeners like to go out and get that. Exiles on Amazon. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, by Terry Solly. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. And that really is the product of a changed heart. So
absolutely.
Getting back to what we were talking about, what you're driven to do, what you're called to. And the title of this episode is The Power of a Changed Heart. And that is some awesome power.
Yeah.
And it's not our own.
Yeah.
It's a power that we receive and give and be good stewards of, and we share it, and we do what God has called us to do, and He does that powerful work in people's lives and hearts. I love that.
Yeah.
So I want to go on to you have their second cohort that is now in the program, and a lot of disruptions because of COVID and limitations. I mean, you can't even take technology in, and the guys are doing with study packets and that kind of thing. Disregarding that, or maybe looking beyond that, what do you see over the next 2, 3, 4 years? What do you want to have happen with the program? But as these inmates get that changed heart and get that training and get that empowerment, what do you see down the road that could actually happen here in the Oregon State Prison? Yeah,
so we're hopeful that it will open up pretty soon here, or in the alternative that Oregon will allow some type of Zoom instruction, to come in. In the meantime, the first cohort men actually finished up their first year, August 31st of last year. So they started in the fall of 2019, and they were able to, even in spite of COVID, they were able to finish up their first year. So they got 1 year in.
Yeah.
Now they're sophomores.
Have you, excuse me for interrupting, have you talked with any of them? Have you been able to this first cohort?
Yeah.
And what are you hearing from them?
Oh, I've talked with all of them that are in the program before COVID.
Yeah.
In fact, I was talking with one guy in our first cohort. He's 70 years old. He may be 71 now. I don't know. But he was telling me that he had a degree from Harvard, and he had a law degree, and he's been in prison for 40 years. So something happened after he got out of law school.
Wow, yeah.
That he's been in prison 40 years. He's got a life sentence. And he was telling me, he said, Judge, he said, I am so thrilled about this program. When I was a young man, I promised my dad that I would go to seminary and get a seminary degree. And he said, I got a degree from Harvard. I got a law degree. My father's passed away now. But now I have this opportunity to get a seminary degree.
Wow.
And when I see him in heaven, I'm going to be able to say, look, Dad, I fulfilled that promise. So that's hope, that he has, and hope that his family on the outside has too.
And I'm hearing too in that story that it's never too late.
It's never too late.
I mean, if you're in prison or have a loved one in prison, I mean, it's never too late to catch a vision, to have a changed heart, and to live a life of purpose and significance. I mean, I can just see these guys, and you're in men's prison now, so all of your students are men.
Right.
And maybe in time that'll include women, but that's a whole other chapter, I suppose. But they will be living changed lives and will be fruitful and productive and have a very significant, purpose-filled life, even if they never get out of prison, but they are free inside because of that. I'm not sure I'm saying all that right, but that's what I want to hear. I mean, that's, that what you're doing, what God is using you to do is to change the lives of many, because through those inmates, other inmates will be affected. So you were telling me also that 95% of the current inmates in the Oregon prison will be released.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a number. That percentage is probably true for most of the states in the country, where 95% of the people in custody in Oregon are going to be released back into our community at some time. So the question then becomes, how do we want them to come back into our community? Do we want them to come back with a hardened heart and a .45 strapped to their waistband?
Yep.
Or do we want them to come back with a transformed heart, transformed by the biblical education that they're receiving through Corban University, transformed by that with a college degree and maybe even a Bible in their hand? So how do we want them to come back to our communities? There's that's an easy answer.
There's your mission right there, Tom.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think I want to wrap it up here, but I would like to give you an opportunity to speak to inmates. Probably won't be able to hear us. Speak to an inmate's family, and what could you say to them about the hope that their loved one in prison could have? And there is communication. I know there's a lockdown, can't even visit for a time. It's been a while. But maybe you can give some hope and some light to those people.
I'm going to kind of turn that question upside down, and I'm going to talk about how the family spoke to me. So on the website, paid in full website, my telephone number is there, my cell phone number. And so one day I got a call from a lady, and she said, "Is this Judge Kohl?" And I said, "Yeah, this is him." "Well, I'm calling. I wanted to speak to you about my husband. My husband is in prison in Umatilla, Oregon, and he thought he got accepted into the second cohort. He's not sure, and so could you let me know whether or not he's accepted?" And I said, "Well, yeah. Why don't you tell me his last name?" When I said that, I was thinking I was going to tell her that he wasn't accepted because we specifically notified each of the 25 men that had applied that they were accepted into the program. So I was not expecting to give her good news. So she gave me his name, and I looked on the sheet of paper for the 25 men who had been accepted into the program, and his name was there, and as one of the new freshmen, in our cohort.
Yeah.
And so I told her, I said, her name is Lacey. I said, "Lacey," I said, "congratulations, your husband is in." And she started screaming and shouting on the phone. I could tell she was crying. And she said, "You don't know what this means to me." She said, "My husband and I are going to be in the same college together. I'm a graduate student at Corbin University. And so here you have a story of a husband and wife, so that are, he's in prison. She's going to college, working on her master's degree at Corbin, and he's starting as a freshman there. I mean, you talk about families that are given hope. I mean, that story will reverberate, I'm sure, throughout the prison system. So, yeah.
So one last thing, Tom, if there is a family member that isn't sure whether their inmate loved one knows about this program, how can they find out about it? How can they encourage them to look into it?
Well, the Oregon Department of Corrections has done, I think, a really good job of letting the inmates throughout the entire prison system. So we have our program is located at OSCI, Oregon State Correctional Institution. That's where our college program is, where in times that are not involved with COVID, the professors go in and actually teach live subjects that are live, teach live to them. So, but the Oregon Department of Corrections sends out notices to all the inmates in the rest of the 12 prisons. So we have 14 prisons in Oregon. One is a women's prison. The other 13 are male prisons. And so OSCI is the male prison where the college is located. So the other 12 prisons, they get notices from DOC about the opportunity to sign up for the Corbin University college degree program. So they get notices that way.
So there shouldn't be anybody that's behind a rock that won't know about the opportunity, at least.
Yes.
So, and there's a process for inquiring or applying. And,
Right. Yeah, we had 300 men apply for our first cohort, 25 cohort, and only 25 were allowed in.
Yeah.
Last year, we had a little over 200 men apply, and so we expect a couple hundred to apply every year. So, yeah.
Can that be expanded at some point so you're able to take more?
We don't have room where we're located now to do that, and 25 is a pretty good number. A lot of the other states are doing 40 in some of their cohorts that they have, but we're kind of limited to 25. Yeah.
It has been fantastic. I have a lot of other questions that I'm curious about. I think others in the studio here do too. Can you come back another time, talk with us some more?
I'd love to.
Great. Okay.
I've never said no to an invite to speak. Like I still told you before, I speak at backyard barbecues.
That's perfect. So anytime we want you, I just call you and off we go.
Yep.
So God bless you, Tom. Thank you very much. Very enlightening and empowering. I love it. This is the awesome power of a changed heart. And by the way, all of us here in the studio have that changed heart.
Yeah.
Because we would be doing something totally different if we hadn't. And thank God for forgiveness and grace and for purpose and meaning in life, and that's what it's all about. So just a quick close here. This is the end of the AfterWords. And we want you to go to MercyToday.global if you want to get in touch with Tom or with his organization. If there's a way that you'd like to step forward and help in some way, send us that to MercyToday.global. And again, I want to say every time, until next time, may God help you be a part of what He is doing in our world today. God bless you, my friend. Goodbye for now.